The cup arced through the candlelight, a dark comet trailing heat and insult, and I understood my son had come to collect more than money. I wiped my face, reached into my coat, and set something on the table that made him go white as a sheet and whisper, "No, don't." I was 72 the winter my son decided I was a liability. The radiators in my old Newton house clanged like distant ships, and the maple in the front yard wore ice like a crown. He paced grooves into my living room rug, his designer shoes thudding against wood I'd refinished with Evelyn the spring we were too broke for a proper vacation, and too in love to mind. "Dad, I need 500,000, not 50. His voice had that smooth veneer he'd honed in pitch rooms and on podcasts. Brandon Pierce, disruptor, visionary, the boy who once cried when a crab pinched his finger at Revere Beach and later learned how to let people bleed for him. I kept my place in the biography on my lap, Grant this time, not Churchill, and found the margin note I'd left years back. "Be slow when they push. I don't have that liquid." "You sold your properties," he snapped. "You walked away with millions. It's invested and mapped out, not waiting around in a checking account for your next big idea." He ran a hand through his thinning hair and pretended not to notice the flinch that crossed my face. The same hairline my father gave me, and I gave him. "This app will remake delivery, AI routing, predictive ordering, low-mile hot drops. It's the future." His hand sketched invisible wireframes above the mantel where Evelyn's portrait caught the glow. He didn't look at her. He hadn't in a long time. "Your history with investors." "Don't!" He jabbed a finger at me, a cornered man with a script. "Stop bringing up the past. This time is different." "Brandon," I said, gentling the name the way I used to when sleep eluded him and monsters crowded his closet. "I won't risk my home to fund another of your burn rates." He glanced around at the coffered ceiling, at the framed paper cranes Evelyn folded with our grandson who never came to be. His face cooled into strategy. "Then sell this place, it's too big for you. Get a condo by the harbor, elevators, amenities, activities, social life for seniors." "This is my home." My jaw locked. "It's where your mother and I—" "Mum's been gone 5 years, Dad." He said it like an indictment. "You can't live in a mausoleum." He pulled on his coat. The photographs rattled when he slammed the door. My knees felt every rung of the staircase when I climbed to the study after. I took down an album, Evelyn labelled in a looping hand that never lost its kindness. Brandon at 3, frosting on his chin. Brandon at 7, me running behind his bike down Commonwealth Ave, one steadying hand. Brandon at 12, holding up a flopping striped base on a rented skiff in Boston Harbor, confidence flooding him for the first time like sunlight. Where had he gone? Where had I pushed too hard? Where had I failed to push at all? When the phone rang, I almost let the machine take it. "Dad," he said, slick turned soft, his broadcaster voice. "Kara and I feel awful about earlier. Let us take you to dinner tomorrow. Harbour and Hearth, 7. He picked my favourite spot, the seaport view Evelyn loved. I pictured Kara's curated smile, hands that always seemed to hold a phone. I could smell the strategy through the line. "Fine," I said. 7. That night I pressed cashmere to the steam of the bathroom mirror and scraped away stubble with the care I used to plate oysters when we could only afford 10 for an anniversary. I took down my navy suit from the cedar hanger. In the study, I opened the walnut drawer and slid a folder into my inner pocket. Letters, deeds, powers of attorney, a recent bank draft with my son's full name. Hope had its own kind of ink. So did consequence. By morning, the Charles wore a skim coat of ice. I walked the loop near the boathouse as the world woke up and let my mind settle like the rower's oars. Dip, pull, breathe. Doubt visited like winter birds. I let them perch, and then I waved them off. At 7, I'd find out if Brandon loved me, or if he loved the idea I represented on a balance sheet. If any of this hits home, I'd love to know where you're listening from. I'm in Newton, Massachusetts. Tap a like if you're walking this road too, and if you want more stories like this, about love, pride, and the way we survive each other, feel free to subscribe so we can keep each other company. Harbour and hearth shimmered with glass and good intentions. In winter, the seaport always felt like a postcard addressed to someone richer. The host greeted me by name. Evelyn and I had celebrated every promotion and wound-licking here, and led me to a corner table where the skyline stacked itself into rectangles of light. Brandon stood so quickly his chair screeched. "Dad, you look great." He hugged like an actor aware of the nearest camera. Kara didn't stand. She air-kissed, set her phone face down but within reach, and pulled the sleeves of a cream sweater to her wrists like armor. Small talk got poured with the cabernet. Weather, the Bruins, the city's never-ending construction. The server took our orders. I asked for water. When the glasses were gone and the eel's slick ease had done its work, Brandon reached under the table and produced a leather folio. Metal latches clicked like cuffs. He spread papers between our place settings as if he were dealing mercy. "Dad, we've done the legwork," he said. "Maple Harbor residence. It's on the North Shore. Great staff. Winter shuttle. On-site clinic. You'll love the woodworking studio." Kara leaned in, voice dipped in honey. "We've toured it. Twice. We're just thinking about safety, Harlan. Stairs, ice, you know. It's time." My name sounded like a verdict in her mouth. I picked up the top page. Releases. HIPAA forms. A line for my signature authorizing financial managers. I swallowed against the sour lift at the back of my tongue. "You filled out most of this." Brandon smiled with the patience of a saint explaining streetlights to a raccoon. "We've handled the waiting list. Friday's open, if you'll just—" He pointed to the signature bars, my name printed beneath each one in tidy borrowed font. I set the papers down. "No." Kara laughed, bright and glassy. "Harlan, don't be stubborn. You haven't had a full cognitive workup in— You're not my doctor." I kept my voice level. The room had gone quiet, the way rooms do when a storm walks in. "And I won't be moved like furniture." Brandon leaned forward, his jaw knotting. "You can't keep up with the basics. Bills, meals, the driveway. You didn't even notice the smoke alarm battery chirping last weekend." "I changed it while you were complaining about it," I said. "Maybe you were too busy rehearsing this little performance." Something wild flashed across his face. He lifted his coffee with the deliberation of a magician, showing an empty palm. "You want proof you can't cope?" he said softly, eyes locked on mine. He tilted his wrist. The coffee left the cup in a dark, clean ribbon, crossed the candlelight and collided with my cheek in a bloom of heat. The sting wasn't scalding. Harbour and Hearth isn't a coffee house and their brew never arrives infernal. But it prickled. My suit absorbed the rest. The room gasped as a single creature. Kara's phone clicked to record, lens hungry. "He didn't even react," she murmured. "He just froze." I dabbed my face with linen and folded the napkin into a tight square. Brandon sat back, breath clipped, chest rising. "See?" he said, voice urgent. "This is what we're dealing with. He can't handle—" I reached into my inner pocket and set a cashier's check between the scallops and the untouched bread. The ink had dried 2 days ago. Brandon's full legal name nested in blue script over $1,000. The number looked obscene and small at once. "For your company," I said. "Before I understood you'd step over your own father to get what you want." Color flooded his face. The room leaned in. Kara's phone wobbled. "Dad!" I tore the check in half. Silence cracked. Brandon lunged, hands open as if he could catch lost time. I crossed the tear and tore again. Smaller, precise pieces that floated like ash across the tablecloth and came to rest in a pattern no bank would bless. "You don't get to test my dignity and then draw on my account," I said. I kept my voice quiet, because quiet carries farther. You don't get to throw coffee and call it a cognition test. Kara's chair scraped back. You can't do this, she hissed, now plain. What he needs, I said, is something money can't buy in a pitch deck. The manager approached in measured steps. Sir, are you okay? I am, I said. I'm done. Brandon's fingers pawed at scraps as if tape and desire could make a thing whole. He whispered, We can fix this, Dad. Not tonight, I said, standing. I left the napkin, folded and clean as a wound. Outside, the wind off the harbor slapped me awake. The seaport lights blinked like patient stars. In my pocket, the folder pressed against my heart like a promise. I'd brought it to save him. In the end, I realized it might be there to save me. The next morning, the robins tested the cold with brief, irritated chirps, and my phone began to ring as if it were on fire. Neighbors, an old colleague, the treasurer from the parish where I haven't sat through a homily in 6 years. Each voice came loaded with concern that felt rehearsed. Hey, Harlan, it's Pete from 3 doors down. You doing okay with things? We've heard you might be forgetting stuff. Mr. Pierce? This is Connie with the Neighborhood Association, just checking if you need help with bills or prescriptions. Dad, Brandon texted, we're getting so many calls. People are worried. You can avoid embarrassment by letting us handle things. The stories were oddly aligned. Missed payments, a stove left on, drives taken and forgotten. I wrote each claim in a yellow legal pad with a date and the name of the source. Beneath each, I wrote what I had actually done. The stove was Evelyn's old Le Creuset kettle, left whistling 3 minutes while I was on the porch with Mrs. Albright from across the street, who could attest to my excellent gossip memory. I poured coffee into my Red Sox mug and opened my laptop, the machine that by rumor I no longer knew how to use. I typed Maple Harbor residence and found marketing shots of smiling retirees in a room that looked like an airport lounge, all daylight and indoor ficus trees. Then I typed Kara Pierce into each social platform and saw a performance as tailored as her sweaters. Hardest season of our lives, one post read. How do you help someone who refuses to recognize decline? Another, when a parent's pride endangers them, what choice do you have? Her followers, a chorus of tasteful avatars, chimed in with condolences and tips about guardianship. Words like stewardship and safety floated atop a darker current. Control. Screen by screen, I saved everything. I called the law office I'd used for my estate plan after Evelyn died and got a receptionist who sounded 12. Monica Ree, said a calm voice 5 minutes later. What's happening, Mr. Pierce? Somebody's trying to make me smaller than I am, I said. I need to stay exactly my size. Monica met me that afternoon in a conference room that smelled faintly of lemons and ambition. I laid down printed posts, my yellow pad log, the Maple Harbor packet. She paged through the stack, her brow gathering. What you're describing is coercion and reputational groundwork for a guardianship action, she said. It can also be elder abuse, depending on behavior. First, we protect you. Capacity evaluations, home safety check, banking alerts. Then we build. Build what? A case from their own voices, she said, tapping a finger on Kara's post about stubborn parents. This is exhibit-worthy. We'll also paper your boundaries. Who can talk to your doctor, your bank, your broker? Right now, only you. By Thursday, the Department of Elder Affairs sent a social worker to my door. She wore a navy blazer and a look that said she'd seen everything twice. Mr. Pierce, I'm Judith. We got reports. I led her through my house. We talked memory. We talked meds. We talked money. She watched me take my daily aspirin and glucosamine, watched me use a password manager to log into my bank, watched me pull a frozen quart of chowder from my labeled freezer, because soup is one of the only ways I know to feed grief. Mr. Pierce, she said finally, tapping on her tablet with a stylus that clicked like a metronome. You're more organized than my supervisor. D. 2 days later, my doctor, a wiry man named Santos, who tolerated my stubborn streak and quoted Red Sox stats in place of small talk, ran me through cognitive tests that felt like cheap parlor tricks, and a few that didn't. He grunted at my answers, and when I finished, he stuck out his hand. "Still sharp," he said. "Tell your son I'll write this in words he can't spin." That night, I slept for the first time in a week. It wasn't full or generous sleep, but it was honest. I dreamed of the old skiff in Boston Harbor, and in the dream Brandon lowered his line and pulled up nothing again and again, and he finally looked up at me, not with anger, but with the stunned eyes of a boy who realized he couldn't command a sea. Friday brought the bank. "Mr. Pierce, this is Amy from Atlantic Federal," a careful voice said. "A gentleman identifying himself as your caregiver tried to access your accounts yesterday. He stated you had dementia." I stared at the wood grain of my desk until the lines blurred into something like water. "And we declined. I'm calling to confirm you have not authorized any changes." "I have not," I said, "and if anyone tries again, I want their name, the date, the time, and the branch address before the teller finishes saying next." Amy cleared her throat. "Understood, sir. We're noting your file." I called Monica. "And the hits keep coming," she said. "We add attempted financial exploitation. We also send Brandon and Kara a letter. All communication goes through counsel, or it's harassment. You okay, Harlan?" "I'm angry," I said, "and a little sad in the way snow makes you sad when you're young, because it's beautiful, and you know it's going to melt." She was quiet for a beat. "Let's transform both into leverage." That afternoon, I walked the cold aisle of the North End Market buying things I didn't need because touching tomatoes still warm from an interior sun made me feel like a person and not a target. On Hanover, a kid on a scooter barely missed my knees. He looked back with a grin that said he didn't miss anybody. I envied him for a flicker of a moment. Then I laughed out loud at myself, and the old women near the cannoli counter laughed with me, because men my age deserve our own jokes. The letter went out. The posts doubled. "When professionals get fooled," Kara wrote, "families suffer." Her followers posted prayer hand emojis and long paragraphs about hard choices. Brandon's LinkedIn filled with humble brags about resilience, as if he'd just survived a layoff instead of orchestrated a smear. Judith from Elder Affairs emailed her report. No concerns, independent, oriented ×4. Dr. Santos faxed his, cognitively intact, no signs of dementia. Monica forwarded both to an inbox she labeled Pierce, capacity. The folder took shape like a spine. I was surprised by what I felt next. Not triumph, not relief, grief, clean, specific grief, for the boy who called me from his first apartment on Mission Hill to ask the name of the tool that makes holes without splitting wood. "A drill, son," I'd said, laughing, and he'd laughed too, and I'd heard in that small helplessness the man he might have become. That man had gone somewhere. Maybe my fear had driven him there. Maybe his hunger had. Maybe both. The why had stopped mattering. When I got home, the answering machine blinked 07. The last message was my neighbor Mrs. Albright, voice trembling with a righteousness she'd scabbed into armor. "I just think, Harlan, that pride before a fall and all that. Brandon's trying, you know." I made myself tea and let the kettle whistle longer than needed because sometimes rage needs a soundtrack. Then I sat at the kitchen table where Evelyn and I had balanced 1,000 ledgers, loans, hopes, recipes, and wrote a letter on real paper with a real pen because ink slows the hand and, if you're lucky, the heart. "Brandon," I wrote, "you're my son. I will always hope for you, but I won't bankroll cruelty. The door isn't locked. It's just one you have to open without a lawyer. I didn't send it. Not yet." Monica slid a stapled stack across the table. Each page felt heavier than paper has a right to be. A restated will, a revocable trust, and springing powers of attorney, naming no family fiduciaries. She said, "You're telling the future what you want loud enough that it can't pretend it misheard." I read it all, the way I read leases in the 1980s when I was the unknown and landlords scanned my shoes for credibility. I traced the gift list with my finger. The Boston Public Library Foundation, a quiet tithe for the building that had held me upright so many afternoons. The Massachusetts Elder Justice Coalition, because some wolves wore cologne and said son. A scholarship endowment at Madison Park Technical, because someone had to teach kids to build with their hands in a city where hands were rapidly becoming ornamental. "Are you certain?" Monica asked. "This closes one door for good." "Yes," I said. "I'm done leaving money where it turns into poison." We signed in a room with a view of Copley that made me think of Evelyn's habit of lagging in doorways to catalogue beauty. 2 paralegals and a notary watched my hand move. My name, my name, my name. It felt like both a benediction and a goodbye. "Next," Monica said, "we serve them. Not with a lawsuit yet, but with an education, new estate plan, capacity certifications, your clear boundaries. Meet them where they miscalculated, publicly, cleanly." "I won't humiliate my son," I said. "That bridge is already ash." "Then you'll give him clarity," she said. "Clarity is not cruelty." That night, the house didn't feel big. It felt exact. The floor creaked where Evelyn danced barefoot to Van Morrison on a Saturday with a glass of cheap wine. The stairs whined where Brandon used to sit and tie his cleats, double knots, triple knots, a boy who didn't yet know that some bonds slip no matter what you do. I slept with the patience of the old. I woke when the church down the hill tolled 9. I boiled oatmeal with salt, the way my father did when there wasn't money for cinnamon. I ate slowly, because it is good to do at least one thing without hurry when everyone around you is sprinting nowhere. At noon, I called Brandon. "Dinner," I said, "tomorrow, same place." He breathed out like he'd been holding his breath for a month. "Thank God," he said. "You're doing the right thing, Dad. I knew you'd—" "Bring Kara," I said. "Bring your best self." I hung up and took a long walk along the Charles. A boy in a rowboat timed his strokes to the slow beat of a drum. I thought about rhythm, how it saves you from yourself. I thought about the drafts I'd shred the night before. Wills where I tried to be kinder than the facts allowed. Wills where I tried to leave breadcrumbs for a man who had no interest in being led home. In my pocket was the letter I hadn't sent. I weighed it in my palm, then put it back. Not yet. Harbour and hearth again, but the room had changed the way a room does after a storm. You count the exits without meaning to. Brandon had on a suit I'd never seen. Kara wore the same smile, just tighter. "Dad," he said, coming around the table with arms held wide, "I've been thinking a lot. I said some things—" "I brought you something," I said, laying the folder down like a meal. "It's time to read." The first document was a letter on heavy paper from Dawson, Ree and Locke. "Professional, restrained. All future communications with Mr. Pierce must be directed through counsel." Brandon's eyes skipped the lines, hunting loopholes. The second document was Dr. Santos's evaluation. I'd highlighted no cognitive impairment in yellow, so glaring it might as well have been an alarm. Kara paled, reaching for her phone, then thinking better of it. "You doctored this," Brandon said, voice wobbling. "You manipulated. Your father passed a surprise medication reconciliation I invented to torture med students," Dr. Santos had told me when I picked up the envelope. "Tell your son to take an online improv class instead." I placed Judith's report on top. Then the pages from my bank documenting the attempted access. Kara sucked in a breath through her teeth, and I knew she recognized the date. "Stop," she said, voice cracking. "Harlan, this is ugly." "The truth often is," I said. "There's more." I slid out the restated will. Brandon grabbed it and skimmed, eyes racing to the beneficiaries, then to the signature. He made a sound I'd never heard from him, a low, disbelieving hum that tightened into something jagged. "You cut me out." "I cut out behavior," I said. "If you walk away from it, you walk back into my life. But money won't be how you walk in." He looked up, as if he could locate an alternative father in the rafters. "You're choosing strangers over your family. I'm choosing a library that soothed me when I was a broke 20-something with a baby on the way," I said. "I'm choosing a school that teaches kids a trade so they don't have to beg gatekeepers for a seat. I'm choosing a group that protects people like me from people like you when people like you forget who they are." We sat there while the harbor threw light at the glass. Kara's composure broke first. "You can't do this without consequences," she said. "We can petition for guardianship," I asked, smiling without mirth. "Based on what? On coffee and captions? On neighbors coached to wring their hands at the right time?" She flushed the color of a bad decision. Brandon folded the will in on itself, as if it could be made into a smaller truth. "Dad," he whispered, "please." I took a breath that hurt a little. "I'd love you," I said, and tasted how dangerous those words can be when you say them to someone who hears only the parts he can weaponize. "But I won't finance your contempt. Your mother wouldn't either." The server hovered, then retreated, then brought the check as if I'd called for it with a thought. I put cash down because sometimes the old ways are faster. I stood. "This is where I leave it," I said. "Whatever you pick up from here is yours to carry." "Dad," he said again, the syllable thin as thread. I walked out, the cold hit like truth. The ferry horned in the distance, long and low. I imagined Evelyn standing beside me, her gloved hand finding the crook of my elbow the way it always did in winter. "We did the best we could," I told her, with my breath, with my bones. Spring remembered how to be kind. The snow peeled back from the yard like a defeated army. I found the trowel Evelyn favored, short-handled, scarred from 1,000 small rescues, and set new tomatoes where her notes in the garden book said they'd find sun at noon. On Tuesdays, I read to kids at the Boston Public Library. I used the low voice for monsters and the light voice for rabbits. A little boy with hair like a dandelion puff stopped me mid-sentence and asked, "Are you somebody's grandpa?" "I was," I said. "I still am, just not the way you mean." He considered this, nodded like a judge, and leaned against my leg for the rest of the book. After story hour, I walked to a coffee shop that used to be a hardware store and sat with Margaret, a retired teacher whose laugh sounded like someone setting down a heavy bag. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel lighter," I said, which wasn't the same as feeling fine. Pete from down the street came by to apologize for repeating things he'd been told by people who sounded responsible. I poured him coffee, and we agreed to keep an eye on each other. That's all we promised. It was enough. When the letter from Madison Park arrived, typed by a student who took care with commas in a way that made me trust his engine rebuilds, it didn't feel like vindication. It felt like oxygen. "Your gift funds 6 scholarships a year," it read. "That's 6 toolkits, 6 sets of boots, 6 apprenticeships that start now." I stood in my kitchen, holding that letter, and let my eyes fill. Not from sadness, from seeing for a breath how small you are and how large your life can be if you decide to use it like a lever. On Saturdays, I joined a men's group at the community center where nobody tried to rescue anybody else. One of the guys, a carpenter named Lou, whose palms looked like he'd held fireworks, said, "Boundary's just a fence you can see through." I wrote it down. On Sunday afternoons, I visited Mount Auburn and said things out loud to Evelyn I'd kept in my chest for 5 years. The cemetery geese didn't mind. The wind carried my words somewhere I couldn't follow, which felt right. Brandon did not call. Kara posted less, then more, then less again. Their silence was not peace exactly, but it was space. I filled it with books and soup and the 1,000 small chores that make a house love you back. Peace attracts tests. The first knock came with a courier letterhead and a return address in a glass tower. Monica read it over the phone and sighed. They're threatening a petition anyway. It won't get traction without facts. Still, we answer. I wrote Brandon a note that wasn't for court. I'll meet you once, in daylight, at a place where the only thing we can throw is time. We chose a park bench on the esplanade where we used to watch sailboats shiver into the wind. He arrived late, habit made, shoulders forward like a man walking into weather he ordered and now regrets. "Why are you doing this?" he asked without hello. "Because I love you," I said, "and because I won't let you turn my last years into your business case." He stared at the water, not at me. "Do you know what it's like to pitch and see eyes glaze? To feel the room leave you before you finish?" "I do," I said. "I sold 4-deckers in Dorchester during the 80s. I watched men decide in the space between blinks that a kid with a second-hand briefcase wasn't worth their time. I learned to outlast the blink." He almost smiled. "You could help me. You could make a call." "I could," I said. "It wouldn't help you. Not the way you need." His mouth flattened. "Kara thinks you're cruel." "Kara is wrong," I said. "She's also a stranger. My son is not. He knows what I'm saying." He rubbed his eyes. For a second, I saw the boy who'd called about the drill. Then a layer slid back into place. "You'll regret this," he said, too softly for threat. "When you fall, there won't be anyone to pick you up." "I won't fall," I said, "and if I do, it'll be because I tripped over something worth looking at." We parted like men leaving a job site after the whistle. No embrace, no animus we could use later as proof. Just that dull click in the gut when you accept a truth with no grace in it. Monica filed our response. The court clerk stamped it without drama. A month later, the petition died in a conference room where language politely strangled it. We didn't celebrate. We took the file and slid it into a cabinet that closed with a soft, final sound like the lid of a jewelry box. I went home, baked Evelyn's 2 lemony bars that everyone loved anyway, and walked a plate to Mrs. Albright. She took them and cried at her own door. "I was wrong," she said. "I let their certainty do my thinking. I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "It's easy to do." We ate the bars at her kitchen table. She told me about her husband's service in Korea and the job he took at the shoe factory and how the building is condos now with a roof deck that looks out over a life he never could have afforded. We laughed longer than the story required, because sometimes laughter is the only woodworking you can manage with the materials at hand. Summer put its hand on the city's shoulder and told it to relax. I let tomatoes go wild. I kept the bird bath filled. Once late afternoon, I saw a hawk land on the back fence and look at me like a peer. Then the call. Not from Brandon, from a number I didn't know. "Mr. Pierce, this is Officer Delgado with the Waltham Police. Your son is fine." 2 sentences, both designed to produce a third sentence, but there was an altercation, a dispute over money. He listed you as an emergency contact. I drove the 15 minutes to the station and sat in a plastic chair that squeaked the way shame does. Brandon stepped into the waiting area with a split lip and a story that didn't quite know whether it wanted to be myth or apology. "It was nothing," he said. "Just a misunderstanding with a contractor." "You don't build things," I said. "You assemble decks." He glanced at Officer Delgado, then back. "Dad, it's resolved. But they told me to call someone. He stopped. The setup died on the vine. I could have reached for my wallet. That reflex is bred deep by love and habit, and the way men like me have been taught to measure our worth. Instead, I took out my phone and texted Monica. "He's safe. Any risk to me? She called the station, talked to Delgado, and then to me. You owe nothing here, she said gently. You're free to choose. I chose to sit with my son for an hour, without paying for his choices. We talked about the Patriots draft. We talked about a restaurant that closed and how we'd always meant to go and didn't. We didn't talk about money. When he stood to leave, he hesitated. You really won't help me. I am helping you, I said, just not the way you want. He smiled, a little cruel, a little sad. Kara thinks you're playing a game you can't win. I'm not playing, I said. That's the only way to win. He left. I stepped outside into air that smelled like hot tar and basil from someone's window box. A kid zipped by on a bike with playing cards, clothes pinned to his spokes so they made a sound like a small, enthusiastic engine. I watched him and thought, that's worth funding. Not noise, not theatrics. Motion that makes a thing go. That night, I took out the letter I'd written months before and added one line. I will love you without being your mark. Then I slid it back into the drawer and slept like a man who'd laid down a beam and found the wall plumb. August brought thunderstorms that cleaned the air and reminded the Maples who was in charge. On a Sunday, I hosted a small cookout, the kind where people bring things in bowls under tea towels and tell stories you've already heard because they want you to know you're in a life with repeats. Margaret brought potato salad heavy with dill. Pete arrived with a six-pack and a tentative confession. He'd started going to meetings in a church basement on Washington Street. Turns out I'm not the only idiot, he said, and we clinked cans to being human. I set up a folding table with a blank ledger, an old-school donation jar, and a sign that said, Kids plus Tools, Schachter's Future. We raised $183 in 2 hours with nothing but gossip, hot dogs, and the stubborn belief that a neighborhood can build a bridge with pocket change. The next day, I carried the jar to Madison Park and signed the deposit slip myself. When the storm rolled in that night, I stood on the porch and watched the street gleam. I thought about my father's warning when I was 20 and full of swagger. You can't teach character to a closed door. I had learned late and with bruises that you also can't rent it out. Brandon didn't come. He didn't text. Somewhere he was building something, maybe a new pitch, maybe a new self, maybe a wall. I decided it wasn't my job to label it. Evelyn's garden flourished. The tomatoes split with sweetness. I cut thick slices, salted them until they wept, and ate them standing at the sink in the way of men who live alone and are not sorry about it. I walked the house at night and touched the picture frames where the glass had gone warm from the day. I said names out loud like prayers and let the rooms say them back. On the first day of school, the library filled with kids taller than they were in June and louder. I read a book about a bear who wanted to be a boat, and a boat who wanted to be a bear, and somehow they found a compromise on a river made of pencils. The kids gasped at the right times, and I gasped too, because I'm not immune to wonder. A little girl with a backpack bigger than her entire future asked, "Are you rich?" "I am," I said, and meant it in the only way that matters. When I left, the sky was that ridiculous September blue Boston saves for people who've tolerated the rest of the year. I walked slowly, counting blessings and cracks in the sidewalk with equal attention. On my porch, a small package waited. No return address. Inside was a keychain Brandon made in 7th grade shop class, a crooked letter P in aluminum, stamped and imperfect. No note, just that. I held it a long time. I didn't assign it meaning. I let it be a thing my son had touched. Then I put it on my house keys, where a plastic lobster had hung for 5 years. It felt too heavy at first, then it felt right. Later, I sat with my ledger and tallied the month. Hours read, dollars donated, neighbors helped, phone calls not returned, boundaries not crossed. I understood something I had known and forgotten. Some victories have no parade. They are quiet, like a fence you can see through. They are simple, like soup and pages and sleep. They are enormous, like refusing to sell the one thing you can't buy back. I turned off the lights and went upstairs, the maple whispering outside like an old friend telling me for once that I had absolutely done enough.